Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love, now I'm...
Welcome to another episode of the How Men Cry podcast. The aim and focus of How Men Cry is to capture 1,000 stories from men within the community. Our focus is to make compassion contagious through opening up about mental health and vulnerability amongst men, and just change the narratives that we've learned. So it is my honor and pleasure to bring in blood relative and family member, the good homie John. What's up, cuz? How you
What's
doing?
going on, cuz? I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right, man. Just, running around.
Yeah, you stay busy. We'll say that it's a pleasure to actually be on with you and spend some time with you here and just be able to catch up.
Yeah, for sure. And I figured that could be part of it too. We've been I feel like we've kept in relatively, decent touch here and there. So, and I've always just appreciated those combos, deep philosophical combos we done gone into. So, I feel like it'll be more of the same today. So.
Absolutely, but don't give them too much. They might have a high expectation to be let down. So,
low key though, like I was saying, I was like, we got way too many family secrets up in here. A whole bunch of stuff going to come out in this book. I'm trying to temper it properly.
Well, don't temper it. Let it out. So, it's funny you start with that. My wife sent me an article today. It was a CNN article, I believe, about the Disney cartoon film Encanto. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I ain't seen that one yet.
So the reason for the article, to the point, is that they're saying a lot of therapists are starting to utilize that article in their sessions, or not the article, excuse me, the movie, the film, and the dolls or toys to work with families. And the reason for that is because all of the characters in the film, it's about a family, I think it's a Cuban-American family, who have different roles, different people with different roles within the family. And one of the roles specifically is a character named Bruno, and he's like cast away or cast out from the family. Yeah. And no one talks about Bruno. You don't talk about Bruno. You don't talk about his stories. You don't even say Bruno's name. And one of the inquisitive family members, the main protagonist, is asking, well, why can't we talk about Bruno?
Yeah.
And everyone she goes to says, nope, don't do it, because he's got this checkered past, essentially. And without ruining the film, of course, that's going to make her more inquisitive and wondering, I got to figure out what's going on with Bruno.
Yeah.
But it highlights, some of the things that you find, the dynamics we typically find in, everyone's family, especially minority culture and family. We all have it, that uncle, that cousin, that whoever that we're not supposed to talk about. And what we end up doing is really just perpetuating more of the taboo about it, instead of really coming out front and having these conversations. We laugh and we joke and we play dominoes and cards, and it just never comes up, and that's it. That's what the family gathers end up being.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's probably one of the bigger issues. Even a lot of the motivation behind a bunch of this stuff is just like, to me, there's so much suffering and silence in general, like whether that's with family units. Of course, this is focused on men in particular, just because of, I think, how sometimes we can be socialized about, talking about things. And you're right. Like that's been, to circle it back even into our past and our situation, sometimes is the silence or the like brushing or the pretending around the subjects, to me, did way more damage than if people just would have been like, this is what's up and this is what everybody's going through. Because then as kids, I feel like you run into your own conclusions, or
exactly.
You're forced to make your own conclusions about,
you draw false narratives about the truth.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is based, cultural. A lot of it is based in religion. A lot of it is based in history. And for whatever reason, we start forming these behaviors and habits that we never break out of, and it just becomes perpetual. And we think we're doing good by it, but in a lot of times we're doing far more damage than if we just talk about it, or if we just explain the differences. And even some of it is a misinterpretation of text, right? So can I go ahead, since you said we're gonna be philosophical and deep here?
Well, actually, you know what? Before I want you to hold that particular thought, because I want them to know exactly why I want them to know the lens that you're coming from. Can you tell
Certainly.
them a bit more about who you are and what you do? And you can answer that however you want to.
Certainly, certainly.
But yeah,
So I'm Jonathan, Jordan's cousin, and uh, black male from Capitol Heights, Maryland, born and raised DMV. Grew up in an environment that, if you know anything about it, it's not, Compton or anything. It's not that serious, but it's the hood. It comes with its own challenges, and one of the things that I always learned or was inquisitive about because of my upbringing, it was, well, why are we making certain decisions or choices? Why are my friends doing some of the things that they're doing? Good kid, mad city effect. That's what I
yeah,
call them. I'm the Kendrick Lamar of my neighborhood. I never had to be that guy because I was around a lot of those guys,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
and I was usually drug free, and I was usually making better choices, unless, hey, no, you're the peer pressure. You're coming today to do this.
yeah,
And I'm like, well, why do they always want to do that? Why are we making better choices? And I think that interest has always led me towards psychology, because I'm like, well, I want to understand what's behind it, right? I always
hmm,
thought it was just a simple solution or simple fix if you could just figure the psychology out behind it. But boy, was I wrong. So anyway, ended up going to Xavier University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I changed my field to psychology from bio pre med. And after graduation, I came back home, went to Howard, and got my master's degree, and later was licensed as both a professional counselor and chemical dependency counselor. And I currently reside in Houston, Texas. So I've been licensed now both for total time, probably about 8, 9 years,
yeah,
maybe close to a decade. Been working in the field now for about 16 or 17, and I'm currently continuing my studies, working on a doctorate now, with a concentration in research psychology, because now I'm starting to be more inquisitive and interested in what the data shows. So that's been my field of choice, and that's what I do.
yeah, man. And honestly, I like the way you put that in terms of, because I think we went you went more of a path of, I think, studying people externally, where I think I went almost more of a like internal. It was a kind of a combination of both, where
Mhm.
I turned more inward, towards things and in periods of difficulty in terms of writing, in terms of other stuff like that. But I know that it's like interesting that in a way, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think there are ways that it can be easy to be trapped within certain mentalities and like not a lot of growth when everybody around you is kind of acting or trending in the same way. So I know for me, and maybe this was for you or not, the separation in ways from even like where we were, where we grew up, different environments, has
Mhm.
really kind of helped that process of growth and self realization,
Mhm. Mhm.
and yeah, so it's just interesting to hear kind of that like journey for you, and also of course to see a lot of those steps, or be able to kind of talk, while that stuff was going on. So yeah,
Yeah.
congratulations, man, though, for real.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, to a point you just made, I don't lose sight of my own internal growth as well. I think over time, the more I thought about how individuals behave in an environment or any particular setting, the more I start thinking about more internally how I behave myself. And well, what is it about me that was different? Or why do I do things different, or why do I choose to do things that I do? And as much as we are different in many ways, I start to realize we're very much just alike. And there's no big reveal here.
yeah,
There were books that I read very early on that gave the message, especially for Black boys and Black communities. And I think that was Jawanza Kunjufu, if I'm not mistaken. And then the title slips in my mind. It's probably sitting on my bookshelf back there behind me. But something about emergency crisis, the lack of fatherhood in the Black community. And when you have that disparate impact, you're going to have some really negative outcomes, or lack of a positive male role model. And it became very easy. And I said, oh, okay, that made sense. My father was around for a good period of time, and was a good example for a very good period of time, not so much always.
yeah,
And then I had, we shared grandfather that, has always been and still is a stellar example for the both of us, you know. And
Yeah.
so I had those protective factors that helped me to stay on the right path.
Yeah.
And when I look back in my community, it's like everybody who had, or most everybody, there are some outliers, but most everybody who had a positive male role model in their life had better outcomes. Those who did not, they're dead or they have served time in jail. And it's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not a decision they made. You know, they didn't make
Yeah.
that choice. They were brought into that decision.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, especially being here in Chicago and just like working with youth, speaking with youth and stuff like that more. I mean, there's a noticeable, I'll say, you know, there's such a deep yearning, I think, sometimes for that connection or for that influence, almost that sense of identity sometimes amongst the young men. And then you just gravitate to whatever seems like kind of like the most powerful imagery or the kind of like the most extreme imagery sometimes.
That's right.
Is because it's like, oh, that's you know what I need to connect with. And I think, and for sure subconsciously I chased a lot of that, you know, during different stages in life, in particular. And you know, middle school, high school is where I took a lot of shifts towards that, because there was, I mean, ironically, for what you're saying, that's the point probably of the most separation in my father and I's, you know, just like journey. So it even then, you know, and just that, like, from having that presence at like different times. And I think it depends on how, you know, grounded or where the kid is at with the rest of the, you know, support network looks like. But
Absolutely.
you may have forgotten it by now. Do you remember the first point that you were going to make when I was asking you to say? It might be too far back.
No, I do. So
okay, go ahead. All right.
So if we can get into it, and I don't mind getting into it. We have obviously both. As Face would say, both mental health and substance abuse issues that run in our family. Neither of which have probably been formally diagnosed, not until either you or I.
Yo, wait, just real quick. Yo,
yeah.
Oh my God, real quick. Just from more understanding of certain, I'll be like, we was fucked up out here. Like, it's like not we necessarily, but I'm just looking at some of the scenarios. I'm like, yo.
Right. So let's put it in context first. Let me clean it up.
All right.
So we weren't effed up, right? We were normal. Here we are. We're the Brunos, right? We have Brunos in our family, right? And this is where 2 points. I want to make sure we hit on this first. We have to be careful with obviously stigmatizing mental health issues, because that's why people don't want the label or don't want the assistance, because they don't want to be considered effed up, right?
Yeah.
So
my words, not his.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm the sailor. I mean, like...
but we get you. We know what you meant. Yeah. So, but at the same time, we don't want to go too far extreme as well, where we start to honor the victim or the victimization of mental health, right? Because that's not what my field in clinical help is about. It's about saying, in spite of whatever it is that you're challenged with, you still have something within you in order to push you through whatever that is you're going through. You still have help, you have protective factors, you have resiliency, you have a number of different things that, in spite of, you know, it being difficult, in spite of the depression being real and it being a challenge to get out the bed in the morning, there's still tools that you have in the toolkit that will get you by, right?
Yeah.
What we're not doing is saying, hey, you're depressed, so you should stay in the bed and you should quit your job and we should pay you and you should go on YouTube and everybody should come in and feel sorry for you and you should make millions of dollars for sitting in the bed and doing nothing in your life because you can't help it. That is not what depression is about, people. Please stop that, right?
Yeah.
That behavior is not cool, because what you're doing is you're really taking the power away from people who oftentimes are really dealing with chemical imbalance that is preventing them. Everything can be gravy in their life, but they literally cannot do it. One, right? And then you might need a type of chemical intervention when we start talking about prescription medications and things like that.
Yeah.
But two, if someone has cancer, we don't say, oh, you're cancer. Just be defeated. Just stay home. It's okay. That's what cancer is. And we should all just pity party you. No, that's not what we do. You say, you're going to be a fighter. There's a little boy here in Houston, Texas right now going around he's got a terminal cancer and he's trying to go around and get 100 different police organizations that will honor him and say he's, you know, a police with the organization. Little young boy, got all the spirit and joy on earth, It's
Wow.
not stopping him from getting up and moving and trying to fulfill something in his life in spite of his terminal diagnosis. But
Yeah.
that's not what we're doing with mental health right now. We're acting like people are completely incapacitated and can't show up at the podium, show up in whatever profession they have that they're supposed to contractually, stay
Yeah.
involved in, right?
Yeah.
It's almost becoming an excuse to say it's okay to not do anything at all.
Yeah.
And that's not what mental health is.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I think it's what's complicated, or because I mean, I do agree. There's like a lot of things about like trying to learn, be accountable, and then like face whatever you're kind of dealing with or
Mhm.
struggling with. I know more than likely just through blood and family and lineage that
Mhm.
I've dealt with a lot of depression, potentially from childhood or just a lot of situations like that,
Mhm.
and had never, because this is probably a point that I think makes it a issue, and even towards things within our family, is with the resources not being readily available sometimes, and or the conversations like from then to now
Mhm.
are changing, even from the standpoint of mental health just being more on the surface level. But
Right.
when I kind of look in the past, I have to work on, like, I might have frustrations towards certain behaviors or certain outcomes, because of
Mhm.
the substance things, because of depression. And then it's like in that space of like trying to lift somebody up, and then at the same space, just being like, how will people be, how would anybody have been shown some of those pathways with no conversation about it, with no
Correct.
real discussion, and also
Correct.
just the knowledge and resource.
Correct.
So it's such a like delicate game. But I
Mhm.
definitely feel what you mean, because I think in times, what one of the best things I've ever learned was to stop identifying with the title of like, I'm a person with depression all the
Right.
time, like this idea, and
Mhm.
moving more towards like, I may experience depression
That's right.
sometimes,
Mhm.
that's a state that I may have, just like I may
Correct.
experience happiness and other things like that.
Correct.
And that like simple shift made a huge difference
That's
in
right.
like my ability to kind of keep balance. And I've been able to get out of depression and like off of substances and other things without medication. And I'm not saying that with like a trying to be I did
Mhm.
it, but
No,
more
no.
so like a lot of that has been from just a lot of like discipline, like mental work, and also like separating a bit from just attaching to those labels in a way that they control my mental spaces.
Absolutely. So that's what mental health is. It starts in your mind, right? We all know that. Your mind is so powerful. My daughter told me a joke the other day. I forget what it is now, but she says something like 6 times over. It makes you repeat it. Oh, I
Mhm.
think she says say milk 6 times. You say milk, 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 milk. What do cows drink?
Well, see, I almost did it.
Right.
Almost, I was about to say milk. Almost did
Milk,
it.
right? And see, but that's your mind. But that's just it. You can trick your mind just that
Yeah,
easy, right? And so it starts there. Your mind is very powerful, right? So what
yeah,
you're feeding your mind or what you're telling yourself is going to contribute to who you are. So if you again take this victim role, and again, the reason we've gotten here is because human beings are so binary, right? All we understand is it fits in this category or it doesn't,
mm,
right? We're black and white. We don't know how to operate in the gray. So it used to be we can't talk about mental health. So now everything is mental health, right?
mm,
Instead of saying some things are mental health or some parts of some things have some mental health component, but not everything is all this all the time,
mm,
right? And we do have the strength and the ability to work through some of these things based on just like yourself. You box, you exercise, you go to counseling, you see a therapist, you talk to somebody about some of these things. So you're starting to identify habits that will get you to creep back in places that make you feel a certain way, right? And it's up to you in order to try to get in front of it. It doesn't always require medication. I'm not a big advocate or proponent for medication. It's a last case, resort for any client I'm working with to say, hey, you should go see a psychiatrist and be put on some medication. But in some cases, yes, there are people who just won't be able to function in society,
yeah,
in our society, the way they would need to without it, right? But
yeah,
that's an extreme, right? And so even for me, like I have seasonal depression.
Mm.
Like I'm talking it's just about 3 weeks before they get ready, maybe 6 weeks before they get ready to set the clock, change the clocks. And I wish they'd stop. I can start feeling it come on, right?
Mm.
It's I have no desire to get out the bed to do much of anything. I don't want to work. I don't want to exercise. I start eating bad. Plus, it's cold, so you want hearty food. So now I'm eating worse. I'm not exercising. A couple drinks here and there on the weekend changes to 2 or 3 beers a night and some some harder liquor because I want to warm up and I want to feel cozy and I want to numb not feeling good. And it just I can detect it. And so I have two choices when that comes. What I either have to do is allow that to happen because I can see it every time and do it, or I can say, all right, now is the time I really need to put on my shoes, put on my hoodie, get outside and start running. Now is the time I need to consume more water. Now is the time that I need to start getting up earlier, meditating, doing whatever I need to do to help me get through this period that's getting ready to come, because I can't control the fact that when the days are shorter, I'm going to feel just awful, right? I've tried the light, didn't do nothing for me. I'll tell you, speaking of medications, and then I'll forget the name of it, just the tip of my tongue. Common depression and anxiety medication. I've tried it, gives me headaches. It takes a while to get to an efficacy state in your system, usually about 3 or 4 weeks. So it's just like the time it takes to get it to start working to where I feel good and can sleep on it. Just like, man, for all of this, I could have just done something else. And then I just sort of take it for a few weeks, feel better. It works. And then I'm saying, bump this, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be dependent on the pill. So this is someone who's really only dealing with something 2.5, 3 months out of the year. Imagine now someone who feels that way 12 months out the year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Different. And I understand it.
Yeah. And I think the part that's crucial or that's really difficult about it is getting the awareness to start to break the cycles of it. And I think that's what's complicated. And I can tell you personally that routine in particular, there's actually an app that I use. I was about to give y'all a commercial, but I ain't going to do it until we get some.
I was going to plug the medication, but I stopped myself there too.
But what I will say is there's routine apps that will kind of gamify things. And probably the best thing that I've done in my adult life is when I was in some of my worst depressions, I literally was like, I'm going to commit to doing this routine in the morning and this routine in the evening. If I do nothing else in the day, if there's no other blah blah blah, I'm gonna do this in the morning and this in the evening, even if it's imperfect, even if I'm late, even if it's all like whatever it is. And I try to also not excuse myself and try to really stick to it. But that was probably the beginning of one of the better mental shifts. However, what I have to say is that was also after a few years of counseling and a few years of stumbling on, a bunch of different things and, being able to quit substances fully and be sober and then having issues of going back. And then, so I think maybe that's probably one thing that I'll say just in terms of listeners is like that road, it is possible, but it also may not be, it may not be perfect and it probably will not be comfortable, to kind of find your way to get to that state.
Yeah. So you asked me a question. So the answer to what I was going to lead with, with substances in particular, since you backed up to that. So one thing which is so interesting in the Black community, we got to do better with this, right? Especially when we're going to just do it anyway. This whole alcohol and drinking thing. Now, I'm not an advocate for alcohol. If you can keep your body free of any substances, better for you, go for it. But if we are going to drink, the Bible actually does say moderation. It doesn't say complete, complete ceasing of any use, right? But because of that, what we've taught traditionally is you're not supposed to use it because it's in a lot of churches, doctrine that, hey, we're not going to use any substances. And I okay. But yeah, it's still happening. So what ends up happening at the family gatherings is the drinkers will usually go outside somewhere. They got their little off-cut place or their little back room place. and they got their bottles and their stash hidden and their little cooler hidden, and they drink. But what they think they're so smart, kids are observant. They see everything. And we learned this and picked up on it very early on. And what we learned was two things. One, oh, you got to hide to go drink. They thought they were hiding the fact that they were drinking from us.
Yeah,
we saw it. It didn't work.
You'd be like,
please,
you stumbling back in here. We know what.
We saw it. Please stop doing that because your kids can see it, right? Mm-hmm. Don't hide it because you're making it worse because you've made it taboo now. But what kids never do what you tell them don't do, right? They don't do what you say. They do what you do. So we want to model that behavior. Ooh, I want to do that. Now you've made it interesting for me. Now I'm inquisitive. Now I want to know more about why you're having to go do what you're doing, right? Instead of teaching moderation and coming in and like a responsible adult, having a drink or two and saying, no, this is for adults. You can't have it. Legally, you can't have it to 21. Biologically, you probably shouldn't have it until you're about 30 because your brain really doesn't finish developing for men until about 30. That put a pin there if you don't know that. But still, I'm going to have one because it's my choice and I can do it. And then we're going to do it responsibly, have a glass of wine, whatever you want to have. Right. But teach them how to consume alcohol in an appropriate way, not make it this thing where it's so secretive. And now I'm more interested in it. And then also, not only is it secretive, now I'm going to overindulge in doing it, the secret thing, rather than, being a lot more responsible with our choices and behaviors. And so they also start to create the Brunos in the family, right? Because those are usually the people who, the outcasted type who are going to do those things, whereas everybody else is sitting in and being responsible and having the, ginger ale and cranberry juice or Kool-Aid mix, And so those things don't help us. And those are some behaviors that we have to start getting out of in the families because you're not fooling anybody. Everybody knows what you're doing.
Well, what's interesting about that too is kind of even the point. I'll say some of the substances is probably not in some of our family history is probably not tester ones,
right?
But,
they are not. We'll get to that.
But I think But to your point is, I think the conversation around it, like, there's so many things that I'm looking back to now, and even just how I'm being in relationship, like something that I even had to learn is like how to genuinely not hide what I'm struggling with and have a moment of bringing something forward to be like, oh, actually, I don't feel good about this, or this doesn't feel this type of way. I didn't realize that it felt so unnatural to do because so much of the struggle that was occurring and like pretty real substantial stuff that was going on was not ever being addressed. And then you're coming to all these, conclusions, or you got, this kind of fight, this kind of argument over there that never really gets addressed, or you never talk about what's going on, or you get a one sentence explanation about a life-changing scenario, and then you just move on and nobody talks about it. And it brings me, well, I mean, one, we've already touched on a bunch of topics of just kind of like, growing up. I want to circle the conversation to how do you feel like the narratives, I guess, that maybe you took on or witnessed with men in particular kind of like shaped who you were young, and then how you kind of see some of those things now.
Wow. So I think very early I had an interesting dynamic in my household because as old school as my father was with gender roles, he still enjoyed certain things. Like he still cleaned, he still cooked, very good cook as well. So I took on that role and didn't have any issue with doing it, but I still know that my expectation was that my wife would be the primary cook in the home, right? That was her job. I could help and assist clean up because I can do a damn good job at it, but that role was primarily my wife's to do, right? And so I think that's where I usually see this playing out more for me, especially in my marriage, is that I brought on a lot of the traditional gender roles and expectations that I had from my childhood into the home and saying, hey, you are supposed to do this and I'm supposed to do these things. And I learned very quickly.
I was like, I wonder where this one's going.
I learned very quickly that wasn't going to fly straight in my home. Now, in your home and someone else's home and the listener's home, that may work just well for you. God bless. But not so much for me. And here was the other thing, and it wasn't a problem dynamic in my home as a childhood, because my mother grew up with traditional female, gendered roles where she
Yes.
did the cooking and cleaning, and that's what she learned. And it became easy. So it was easy to adopt, those things and bring them to my marriage. Well, what I also learned, which wasn't good, was divorce, right?
Yeah.
And what divorce teaches you and what studies show is that the people who grew up in homes where they experienced divorce feel a lot less, feel like there's a lot less of an issue with having a divorce in a marriage.
Mm.
Because again, it's a learned behavior. They saw this growing up, no big deal, right? So they don't look at it the same way. They don't look at it as if getting divorced can be an issue or concern. It's just a part of life. These things happen. And so I was early on when I had problems in my marriage. I would have been the one that would have been easily more like, hey, well, if it's not gonna work, we can just go on, no big
Yeah.
deal, whatever.
Which can work for people. You know what I'm saying? It can, you can,
Which
but
can work,
I
which
can
can
get,
work.
I can
But,
understand.
but when you're married to someone who's coming from a union still, they're like, what are you talking about? That could never happen. How that's
Yeah.
impossible. The fact that you even say something like that is so hurtful. And for me, it was a dismissive thing. Like, well, I'm not trying to hurt. I'm just being honest about what I think could be, a natural way to resolve whatever issues are going on. Perhaps this is something we can do.
Yeah.
And so you know, and you start to learn your family dynamics of how you brought stuff from your childhood and what you experience and see from men in your home, and how you bring that into your marriage. Now that's speaking probably maybe larger, more globally from, family dynamics, but specific behaviors from men in general. That's a hard one. Toss something at me and let me see if I can back something back, because I could go on there, but I'm kind of fishing at what you're trying to get at.
Well, no, I mean, honestly, it's just open to, because it's interesting what I found for me towards relationships in general. I think
Mhm,
from witnessing, like when I really went back, even with my therapist, to look at like a lot of our family dynamics, and this is no shame or shade to anybody,
mhm.
just the reality of it is that outside of our grandparents' immediate situation, they all ended in
In divorce.
divorce.
Mhm.
Like literally, like
Yep.
when I was trying to tally it up with my therapist of like, oh yeah, how do you look at relationship? Because the narrative, a lot of the narratives that I walked away with is that those circumstances were not safe for me. That was like the undertone emotional
Yep.
outlook.
Yep.
And it's something that I'm still working through now. And then when we really started tracing it back, it's like,
Mhm.
well, yeah, dog, like, why would you? I mean, not why, but you can walk away with different,
Sure.
with different conclusions. But I think at the time, in particular, like, because you're like a little older than me, we're a little further along.
Mhm.
But at the time when all that was happening, I'm like right in that middle school era, right?
Mhm.
Kind of that younger. So like from seeing it all, that was like, it was like one after the other, after the other, with the
Yeah.
exception of our grandparents, so
Which is so odd, right? I know that's got to be so mind blowing for you. It's always been.
yo, when I really started, like when I really went back into it, it
Mhm.
was it was tricky, because in my own personal relationships there was
Mhm.
such of a undertone of kind of like sabotage, I think, at
Mhm.
times, because the feeling was like, it was such a response feeling of like, well, this probably isn't going to work out anyway, or it's probably, even if
Right.
that's not what I was, cognitively thinking, or
Right.
trying to project,
Right.
that's what would be the like undertone sometimes.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely. And I
yeah,
heard someone say it too recently. I want to give them their credit as well. But I've always had this thought in studying people, seeing that human beings, again, we're so binary. We usually do one of two things. Either we repeat the past, or we say, I'm never going to be anything like that again, ever.
yeah,
And I'm going to do complete opposite. Right.
yeah,
And I think you and I both have another model of that as well with our other cousin, right? Like,
yeah,
whatever his experiences were so bad and traumatic for him, he says, I'm going to be the complete opposite of that experience in
Yeah.
my relationships going forward. You'll never
Yeah.
see that character in me at all, you know?
Yeah.
So, and that's true. And it generally holds up. You really don't find anything much in between. And that doesn't say a whole lot of you saying, well, you only really had two options here, but it's not just what I believe. It's also how I behave and how I show that, you know, in my relationships or whatever it is in life.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like it's fascinating also to hear from the family, but then also from, you know, your actual background around a lot of these topics too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so I would say, so now that you are raising, you know, kids and
Mm-hmm.
youth,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of, how do I even want to ask it?
Go for it.
How do you try to set the tone as a father within your household now? You know, just kind of knowing, and I'm sure probably even
Mm-hmm.
more than most, like unpacking a lot of that stuff from the
Mm-hmm.
past. You know, how do you feel like that has maybe influenced or changed how you parent now?
Yeah. So how I parent, I have tried to at best eliminate a lot of historical baggage, right?
Mm,
So when I talk about historical baggage, I'm speaking about, and not trying to be too philosophical or deep here, but things that we bring out of slavery, right?
yeah.
Like the idea that in order for me to get you to do what I need you to do, I'm gonna beat you, right? I'm gonna
Hmm.
physically beat you to get you to do that. Now, I think the younger a child is, a tap on the behind or the leg or the hand, whatever, may be appropriate or necessary because they don't have language the same way, right? That we do now. And I don't need you to touch the plug because then I actually might die if I don't,
Right.
you know,
Right.
give you some really painful negative consequence to prevent you from doing that. But as you get older, you have a mind, and there are more creative and constructive ways for me in order to get you to adhere to any type of rule or standard that we've set in the home. And it doesn't require me to beat you. It doesn't require me to yell and curse you either, right?
Hmm.
Especially now with this generation, I realize it's so easy. I don't have to yell. I got a button on my phone. I can go in and turn on an app and say, cut off all electronics.
You petty.
And they are devastated, right?
He said, "Yeah, why?"
It's so easy now. I can get what I want. Oh, your room not clean? Boop. I don't have to take the TV out the room. I don't have to do any type of grandstanding at all because this
Yeah.
generation is so easy to deal with because all they have is electronics.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I've tried to eliminate those things because I realize that what I'm teaching is not to prevent you from doing something wrong. What I'm teaching, the message I'm sending is, in order for you to comply with authority, the authority needs to beat you. Or in order for you to have someone of authority or to have authority and have someone comply with you is to beat them. And
Yeah.
that's the wrong message. That's not the message you want to send home. And it's hard to undo that because that was how I was raised, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I realize now there's so many more creative ways of helping children to grow and learn and make better choices. And what I understand now that we didn't know is that we thought, you know, kids were supposed to be goo goo gaga and holding pacifiers until they were 4 and 5 and rolling. Absolutely not. Stop it. Right. Like I've got two very, very bright children. I know everyone says that about their kids, but once you realize what a child is able to learn early on, especially, you know, in those from the toddler phase on, they can absorb so
Hmm.
much and they can learn so much so fast that we've taken such for granted early on that we don't have to do anymore. So they're so smart. It's an easy way to get them to understand, hey, there are better ways of doing something or making better choices in life. So that's one thing that I've tried to implement and change. Now, for the whole divorce situation and talking about that, what I realized again, for the same reasons why I got into this field, is that the damage I can do now, if I'm a bad guy and I'm just not doing, then yeah, maybe they'll be better off without me in their house. But as long as I'm not that, as long as I'm doing the best that I can for for the provisions that I have, then I want to stay around for them, right? Because as much as I might be upset or unhappy or think I'm upset or unhappy or think I could do better or whatever might go through my head, I know that the severe consequences for leaving my children's life, would far outweigh any added gain or benefit I may think I would get otherwise, because it has a detrimental impact. Because you and I both have gone through it. We both have experienced it.
Yeah.
And we take it for granted. And it's just selfish to me. And that's just one thing for me. Like, dang, it's like I can't get beyond that. Like, I cannot do those kids like that.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because even now I've been going through, you know, my own debates of, do I want kids? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? We'll get into that in a whole separate conversation. I'll call you about that later. But that is something where, you know, I did like say to just like a previous partner of like, I've had the commentary of like, you know, it's like, you would be a good dad. Like you should really try to do this, and not like right now, but I just mean in general. And I think that was something that when I run through kind of the thoughts, is I was like, the one thing for sure that I know, you know, that I would commit to is just to try to continue to show up and to be a presence. Because like you said, that void is really, it's, I think for some seemingly unsolvable sometimes, like just how impactful it can be. And the other thing I was kind of thinking about when you were just talking about the method of parenting, I think what is something that I'm still unpacking or like working through in therapy and stuff now is like the part with what's interesting is we got beat as kids and other stuff like that. Never to a point, at least for me, you know, where it was what I would consider, you know, like extreme abuse or anything like that. But what was actually a bigger issue for me sometimes was the verbal stuff, and that's actually what has sat with me for a lot longer, that I've had to like you know, unpack and kind of work through, because like you said, for kids, absorbing and picking up so much being young, I think it's really difficult, because for boys in particular, it's the scenario of, you know, you yell at the little boy a lot, blah, 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 whatever it is. And then there's, oh, well, why do you have this temper? You're not supposed to have this temper. You need to go to your room and be punished for having this temper. When you're actually just angry because I just yelled at you and I didn't communicate anything, but then I'm gonna punish you.
On top of
also for being mad, for me not, you know, or like the parents are not communicating. And I don't know if it's always witnessed that, like how impactful that can be in terms of like negative self-talk as somebody is older, or anger and frustration and things that are kind of carried on. And I think that is relatively, you know, generational. I think that our parent and our parents' generations, exactly like you said, it was rooted in things that were more, you know, like that. So I'm glad, one, to hear, you know, for you personally, but then in a bigger sense, though, that tone at least seems to be changing with the way that, you know, conversations are.
Absolutely. Our parents and family did the best they could with the information they had and what they knew best at that time, right?
Yeah.
It's up to us to take what works and to sift out the rest and you know, and keep that, but then, you know, keep the meat, discard the bone, you know, and then pivot wherever you can and bring in something new. And so, you know, I struggle with that as well, conversation with my wife. So the example is, for example, when you talk about values and beliefs, right? So my wife and I both share the value of respecting one's parents or elders, right? Where the beliefs just are different is how you go about showing that respect, right? So to my wife, because she was raised, you don't talk back to an adult. Anything that is perceived as having a response to something she says is a manner of disrespect. Now, we grew up more or less with that same thing, right? And I get it. But what I've learned is, because, for example, my daughter is so inquisitive. She's so thoughtful, and she's always looking for clarity. She's got engineer brain. She wants to understand. She's very black and white and concrete, which can be a problem, obviously, right? So, you know, if you tell her something and there's some type of discernible, you know, conflict, she's not going to do none. That's not even what she'll say. Well, hold up, mommy, you said this, but that, you know, she's like, you said left the cup here. You had to tell me 100 times, but you only told me 2 times. You told me this morning and then that's it, right? That's it. And she's not being a smart ass. She's just so concrete. She literally said, well, you said 100, mommy. It was twice. I was getting ready to come out the room. It was only twice. You didn't say 100 times. You know? And I understand her. So I'm laughing at it. I'm like, dear, she's not intending to be disrespectful or talk back. She's just so concrete. She's trying to make sense of, well, did she miss something?
How it's being presented.
Did you actually tell me 100 times? Because I only heard twice, And so for me, I don't get up in arms about those things. I say, okay, that's her. She's concrete. She's trying to make sense of her world and what's, what information she's provided. But for my wife, it's not gonna fly, right? And so those are one of the ways, like and what I had to learn, and what my wife told me is, if you don't agree with something that I'm doing parenting, then you wait until we're in private and you talk to me about that off to the side. But nevertheless, I think that's one of the places where, certainly we're still working through, and where I would defer. I still value. I don't find that disrespectful. I find that behavior as a child trying to seek clarity. And I'm happy that she is doing that, because what I don't want her to do is grow up as an adult and, the boss or somebody, some superior supervisor, it gives her, some bad information and tells her to do something wrong. And she doesn't have the wherewithal, foresight, or confidence to say, yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. Let's talk about that. Right. You need that skill as an adult. But if we're not careful, we can wrongly beat or yell or scream that skill out of a child. One of my favorite shows, I'm trying not to plug stuff, is getting ready to go off the air. Anthony Anderson is in it. If you watch it or not, they had this episode called Black Breakfast. And what was hilarious is that for the Black family, they dressed up. They were really nice, clean, sharp to go have breakfast, on Sunday morning. And they were very, dab, and they had their napkin in their lap, and they did everything by the rules. And these white family, 2 kids of white family, runs up to them and starts grabbing food out their plates, right? Now you don't do that, right? You definitely don't do that. But what was funny was, so it set off the Black family, like, you're not supposed to behave that way. This is Black breakfast. You have rules in place with how you're supposed to do this thing. So it transitions later on, and they're doing experiments at school. It's a science fair project. And the Black children do your typical, put the, baking soda in the fake volcano and vinegar and make it go off. And yay, it's a volcano. Woo. Yeah. Well, the white kids who are more, eccentric, create like an app that does something amazing, basically, right? And while the Black family, Anthony Anderson, sitting there looking at it, he's like, oh my God, this is great. I need to download this right now. Right? And so what the moral of that episode is that, we teach Black children conformity, right? Like we don't get to go out and act up and act out and explore and be creative and think for ourselves. No. We teach conformity. This is how you're supposed to do it, because all these consequences come if you don't. It's panic and fear and anxiety. Whereas white kids or other children have the opportunity to just explore, be themselves, learn, adapt from their environment. And what it is teaching them is to be creative in a sense, right? And so we don't know, by us trying to overparent and control and protect and do so much, we end up taking away the joy and spirit from our own children at times to be more creative in life. Now that's an extreme version, right? That's not going to, there's no correlation, necessarily scientific correlation that states that, but that was the message they were trying to pull off or convey essentially in the episode. And so I think when you think about things at that nature or at that level, you start to question, hey, is this really necessary? Am I overreacting, or is there a different way for me to address and handle this?
Yeah. And I think that is a pretty valid point, because I think culturally there's a lot of pressure sometimes for conformity. And I think that's been even one of my like personal issues or just personal battles, is like a whole lot of that stuff I've never really, or I would say there are a lot of cultural conformity things that I just have never that I don't connect with and
Yeah.
still continue to not connect with.
Yeah.
And then in, you know, the most extreme cases, it turns into all types of other debates or, you know, negativity or bullying.
Mhm.
Like as you go through adulthood or childhood for
Mhm.
non-conforming things, like
Yeah.
still to this day, I've like never owned a pair of Jordans and I don't like
Right on.
how Jordans look. Like I think they're ugly shoes. I'm like, it's not about, I'm like, most of these shoes are
Right.
really ugly to me,
Yeah.
but there's like been literal points of issue or blah blah. So it's not, you know, that situation exactly, but
Yeah.
I can definitely resonate with how that, you know, has impacted or just battles, and I can remember it even from like childhood things, and I'm
Yeah.
sure, you know, generally speaking, it can happen within any type of culture, but for
Mhm.
sure, I can. There's like practices that I can see sometimes that might lean a little more towards that for us.
Yeah.
Something that a question that I like to ask. I was just looking at time, like, dang, we've
Mhm.
been chopping it up. A question that, you know, about just the project How Men Cry.
Okay.
You know, we talk about crying not necessarily manifesting as like physical tears
Yeah.
for men,
Mhm.
and you know that can be the way that I've kind of interpreted it is that
Mhm.
men can cry out sometimes in forms that may be healthy ways of, you know, healthily dealing with maybe anger or frustration or
Mhm.
other things. But on the flip
Mhm.
side of that, you know, I think there's a lot of push that goes towards more of the self-harm related
Oh
things, some
yeah.
of the things with substances, violent outbursts, or
Mhm.
anything like that.
Mhm.
So I pose it as kind of like an open discussion question of, you know, would you be comfortable either sharing a time that you've just like literally cried or maybe had to show vulnerability, you know, or just maybe talking about some of the different complications with maybe crying out in ways that are, you know, not as healthy that maybe you've had to learn or heal from.
So both I'm fine with. Um, narrowing it down would probably be the more difficult thing because I want to be careful here with even some more political things that have happened more recently that caused me to come to tears. And just to speak to it without getting too much into that portion is I think now as a parent, my fear is more about my children now, right?
Yeah.
And so I found myself coming to my knees and bringing my family together and huddle and say, look, I'm coming to tears and I'm praying over you all right now because I can't control this thing. I don't know what to do about it, but I'm scared, right?
Mm.
And I don't have a problem being scared either. We should talk about that after you shift from how men cry, why it's okay to be afraid, right?
Yeah. Part two.
Right? It's okay to be afraid. That's not some sucker stuff, right? Um, but feeling fearful and knowing and what to turn to in order to say, hey, look, I need help right now because I have a specific role in this home, and right now I don't feel like I can manage it. Right, I don't know what to do, and so I'm concerned about these babies, and I need some protection for these babies. Right,
Yeah.
and that made me cry. And speaking to it specifically, it was more about when we were going really heavy through this social political stuff right here at the end
Yeah.
of 2020. It got to a point where it was just too much. And specifically, I just, one day somebody took a Bible and went and walked and stood in front of a church who, if he really stepped into a church, well, anyway, leave that alone. I'll leave it for the listeners to draw the connections. But what happened preceding all of that really, really bothered me in a really bad way. And I just thought, well, if so many people are going to be complicit and sit and watch this and not, say, this is not right, we're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And so I cried for my children mostly. I cried because I felt like I don't know what's next. And for the listeners again, if you missed it, I'm in Texas, and tech, June we celebrate June 19th for a reason. So when you come to Texas, things are slightly different from Chicago or a DC, some places, or New York where we're a lot more progressive. Here things move a little bit slower, and so you see things here a lot more. You're exposed to a lot more things that You're like, they still do that here? That still happens? Yeah. So, and there's more to it, because and if you're a black person and you also learn to know this, and I'm digressing here a little bit, but I'll bring us back.
Sure.
When you make a little bit of money and you get out of your environment, typically you are in environments with other black people.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that, right? And so you feel exposed. You feel out there. I don't have family. I ain't got the CH crew here with me. It ain't nobody that I can pick up on the phone and I'll be there in a minute. That's not. We talking plane flights now, so that's not gonna work, right? So very different. But since we were talking about it and we got here, I think one part I would be remiss if I didn't share is obviously when you're aware when my father told me I was the first person he told that my father went missing. He went missing from the home for, I don't know, it was just below the time period where you could do a police report. I don't know what it was, the time 24, 48 hours or whatever it was. It was over a day. But they said, well, if you wait 5 more hours or whatever it is, we'll be able to provide a police report. And he comes back in the house in the middle of the night. He doesn't say anything. My mother and my sister's on the phone downstairs in the kitchen. I think this is when they're either talking to family, trying to find him, or on the phone with the police. Comes upstairs, completely ignores them, runs in his room, goes through something in his drawers and closet. And I'm sitting in my room. I'm nervous as hell because I'm like, what is getting ready to go down?
Yeah.
And he walks into my room and he says to me, straight face, as matter of fact can get, I'm just going to let you know that I've been out smoking crack and I love it and I enjoy it. And that's what I'm going to go do. If your mother and your sister asks, that's where I'll be. Left out, went downstairs, walked out the front door, got in his car, took off. And I said, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. How old were you around that time?
I believe this was like around summertime of the 10th, getting ready to go into junior year. So I want to say 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
Maybe 14, 15, 16, I think. And it just, I was, I don't use this word, flabbergasted. Like what am I supposed to do with that?
I don't know with the proper. I don't know if there is a proper response to that.
For that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it brings us full circle because we opened up with, well, what about your neighborhood and your community? A lot of my friends sold crack cocaine. So immediately I'm like, who is your dealer? Like, where are you going? What is happening right now? Right. Or even if not, what happens when they find out? What's that going to do with my relationships? Right.
Yeah.
This was like a devastating dynamic. And this isn't somebody who did that. Right. This was, we were that, I was that one of those first generations with Dare, it was like, you know better. That's not something you do. You had enough exposure from schoolwork to know that that's the drug you just don't touch, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You knew about what was happening in DC around that time. Rayful Edmonds had already been through there. I'm sorry, I hope that was okay for me.
Oh no, I mean, and to be real, I mean, it had ripples. It was, it had ripples within our family.
The point was, this wasn't day one. Like, this was something that you knew better than to touch. And so how it affected me is, like you said, it affected me in anger. Like, it was anger. It turned into anger, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure I probably cried several times between that day and whenever, but how it manifested was mostly anger. And I lashed out in a number of different ways because I gave up. I essentially felt like, well, what the hell? What does anything matter? I don't care about anything anymore. Just complete devastation and disappointment. And of course, the long story was, it had financial effect. Obviously the marriage ended with my mom. I was getting ready to go to school, so I was checked out when my first semester. I didn't care.
Wow.
It just goes on and on and on, and it was just deep. And the hooray or hallelujah part of this whole story is he got his life together. He stopped using drugs, right? He's completely clean and sober and has been for a number of years now. And he and I had the conversation. That was one of the more difficult conversations I had with him was, what exactly, was going through your head? Why did you come, tell me, what was it? Why did you say to me? And he didn't know, but you wouldn't.
Did he not remember it?
I don't even think he remembers it.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't even think he truly remembers it. But it was just like, well, why did you lay that at my lap? You know what I mean? Because we were more importantly concerned about you and your life and the fact that you were gone missing for, 36 hours or however long it had been. You came and told me, and I'm just like, that messed me up some type of
Yeah.
real serious. It was
Did
like you
they
couldn't.
even I ain't trying to
Go ahead.
name drop. Did they even see him like leaving out? Was this like in and out? Like did he
No,
not
this
even
is literally
communicate
in
with
and
them?
out. They saw him.
Wow.
He didn't speak. They were just like, where have you been? I heard that from my mom.
Yeah.
He walked upstairs, ignored, grabbed his stuff. I don't know whether he was looking for more money or what. Left out the house.
Wow.
That was it. And so it was devastating. It took me a long, long time to deal with, those frustrations, because the one thing that I had that was stable, that helped again guide me to help me make better decisions, that my friends didn't have, now I no longer had now.
Yeah.
Right. So now I started understanding that I don't give a F attitude. Right.
Yeah.
Now I started getting why you can feel like, why does any of this matter? What are the consequences? And there was no longer an authority in my household anymore. So guess what? Mama can't tell me nothing.
Yeah.
You can't tell me nothing.
Yeah.
Daddy's gone.
Yeah.
Right. I'm that dude now. I'm gonna do what I want to do up in here.
Yeah.
Now, right. And I don't lose sight of that now. Right.
Yeah.
Because what's most amazing here is you see it full circle. You talk about with the kids and how I raised them. The pushback mommy gets here in this household, daddy will get, but the minute I raise my voice one time, it's over.
Yeah.
Makes all the difference.
Yeah.
It's over. It's something in the tone, the dynamic of just the biology of the man in the house that makes it different. I can't tell you the science behind it, but I can tell you historically, it makes such a difference. And that's one way, like you say, like long-term, dealing with that, then identifying and understanding I also had depression, and you couple that and you couple the changes, you couple getting ready to go to school, it just does a number on you. And if you don't meet with anybody and have therapy or talk to anybody about any of that stuff, you carry a lot of that baggage on. You carry a whole lot of that baggage.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe just one follow-up question about that, is how long did it take you to actually start to even talk about that stuff? It's like, was that like something that was immediately expressive, or
Not nearly. I probably didn't start seeking help myself until closer to I graduated from undergrad, probably probably after I got married. So I would say probably around 2006 or so, 2007. I think that's when I first saw my first therapist and started talking about, the things that I experienced. And we hadn't even gotten into, bullying, being bullied growing up.
Yeah, you like we
didn't talk about getting shot at. We didn't talk about, saying, hey, come over and play Madden. And then your friend said you come over to the house, to his big brother house, play Madden. You get over there, you get tricked, and they hand you a pair of gloves and say, bag this crack cocaine up or else.
Right.
Like we ain't talked about none of that stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And everything was, and that's I don't want to leave this off the record because this is important. I tell my wife this: yelling is a trigger for me. Right.
Yo, same.
Yelling is a trigger for me. And because in my neighborhood, I tell this all the time, even being self-aware, the physiological response does not go away. Like we talking years of this conditioning. In my neighborhood and in my home, when yelling occurred, something physical happened.
Yeah.
Right. Especially in the neighborhood. At home, you might have seen a hole punched through a wall. It was terrifying. Right.
Yeah.
In the neighborhood, yelling meant fighting and or shooting.
Yeah.
And so when I tell her, I say, when you raise your voice, there's something that triggers in me. That fight or flight is mean, right?
Yeah.
And because I was bullied and I said, I'm never going to run no more, I'm not letting anybody take advantage of me, my natural go-to is fight.
Yeah.
So when you yell, I'm like triggered and I'm ready to fight whatever it is that I feel is a threat.
Yeah.
And that is not going to work in a marriage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it is taking a lot of work. I'm counting and I'm, first I would leave. I would try to just leave and come back but that only made it worse because you never got the issue resolved, right? but you go through a number of different techniques and things that you try to do in order to deal with that physiological response that you have no control over. So if you speed down the highway doing 65 and somebody pulls out in front of you, slam on your brakes, they weren't trying to commit suicide. You know,
Yeah.
it just happened. They weren't paying attention. They made a mistake. But you can't stop your heart from racing and your reaction and respond to what they did, right?
Yeah.
So when you have that recognition of, oh, you know what? This person didn't do this deliberately to me. They aren't trying to kill themselves. They aren't trying to kill me. They just made a mistake. I've made them before. It's okay. I don't even look at them. I take a deep breath. I turn my head. I drive past them. I swear I will look away. I don't make any contact, because what I have to realize too, especially here in Houston, Texas, giving someone a finger gesture might end up leading you get killed, even if it was their fault and you may think they deserve it, right? And so those are some of the things that I preach to people. I'm like, I'm preaching, I'm teaching, I'm educating, I'm doing this, and I'm using these tools in therapy. I've got to be able to apply them to myself, right?
Yeah.
But the physiological response is real. So you couple all of these things and all of that baggage, all of these things that have occurred in childhood, they all form a lot of our responses in life. And until we start talking to somebody to even identify them and understand, oh, I guess that does make sense now, right? That's where it starts. You have to be able to do that. And that's what the journey has been in this life. And so I have to, again, with kids as well, I have to be able to learn and identify what's wrong and screwed up with me, so I don't turn around and screw somebody else up.
Yeah. And honestly, that's real. And even the anger response, other stuff like that, I realized that within myself, multitude of reasons on how it, developed. And in general, I would say the area we lived in was a little better, but it wasn't all that far, depending on depending on what was going on. And I definitely have a similar trigger point, and I think it's why I've taken such a fascination to like martial arts and other things like that too, because that it does push buttons and other points and stuff. One of my boxing coaches actually was saying to me once, he was like, man, he was like training me one time, and I don't know if I was like angry about something or whatever it was, and he's after we were done, he said, you know what, man? He was like, I wouldn't do it with you. He was like,
because you don't have no stopping point, huh?
You gotta cut off. Something in there. He was like, he's like, you real, you calm. He was like, I wouldn't, but I feel you, because it's like, just from the standpoint of like, it's taken me a lot of time to really get a grasp and to get a hold, because to that point of like, the physiological response is not like that brain. That brain is way faster
exactly
than the one that's let me
they let you come. So
I'm gonna take it.
So there's the side. Have you talked about the science behind that with any of your guests? Because there's just true. There's
I mean you're fast and you're fast and slow brain, prefrontal cortex,
your amygdala and all of that stuff. I mean, your animal brain, it sends you the sensation of memories and feeling before you have the opportunity to have any rational process and thought. And so you're reacting before you're thinking.
That was actually one of the things that boxing in general taught me, was more so from a standpoint of how to get a hold of it and then use it mindfully or like, choicefully, because I think like Mike Tyson, a few different boxers talk about it, where they're like, there's no fighter that isn't afraid or have some kind of adrenaline or something like that, but being able to take it and then not just go entirely crazy and just do whatever else and throw whatever kind of punches, but also to be able to have enough like wherewithal to say, all right, I'm going to be calm about this. I'm going to be selective. I'm going to use, which in a way has been more of a metaphor in life in general. I ain't been perfect at it, but it's definitely been a process of kind of unlearning it. And just to your point too, I think there are so many young men, especially when I see it within Chicago and just around the different narratives of violence being a relatively acceptable response for men. And it's actually been a lot of my separation sometimes around like even things that we do in like music, things that we do. Like I try not to get on a high horse of, I can't appreciate somebody's art, but there's definitely perpetuations of the acceptableness of responding, you know,
Exactly.
like that. And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, it's like it is really heavy. And we can go on forever. So I gotta
Yeah.
ask you this
Okay.
this last question, because they're
Come
gonna
on.
be like, how would this interview end up being 3
Yeah.
hours long? What, I'm gonna ask you a final question in closing. We're gonna have to catch up about the rest of this separately. What do you feel like the world can use more of from men?
Man, that's a good question. That is a good question. I would say, I don't want to get any trouble here. Let me see how I can phrase this. Oh, you did not ask me that question.
I don't know what's about to happen, y'all. I don't know what you're about to
It's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna do it to myself or you, because we both be canceled here. For men, it is important for us to perhaps consider that the way we think about what manhood is may be incorrect or inadequate. The examples that we are getting or receiving, especially from social media, and you hit on it with like rap artists, is not necessarily the best example for everybody, right? What doesn't get lost on actors, for example, is they're playing a role or a character for a movie, and that is not who they are in
Yeah.
their everyday lives. And we lose sight of that because there's a blending between that they're never in character. They're bringing their true and genuine, authentic selves to their music, right?
Mhm.
And for some people that may be okay because, you know, they are one in a million, you know, and their alternative might be jacking or robbing or selling drugs, sure enough. And so if that got them out of that, then, you know, God bless you. But that can't be everyone's story. We can't all subscribe to and try to achieve and become and have some of these things that are just out of our grasp. We have to learn to accept what we are provided with and do or be good stewards of that, right? Especially even within our own community, starting there, right? Let's not lose sight and focus of how we dress, the type of shoes we have, whether we had a chain, foolishness, you know, needing to flash mob Nordstroms to go steal stuff in order to wear a pair of Balenciagas, you know,
Yeah.
that's for the birds, right? Like we need to really get back to focusing in on what we need to be able to provide for ourselves and for our growth and our culture. You know, it pains me that as a community, Black folks are so divided and don't refocus or aren't focusing on our community health and the way that we need to, and we have our own little independent thoughts that we want to make important to us, but not any other culture behaves the way that we do. But there's historical reasons for that as well. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
for sure.
So I don't
Yeah.
lose sight of it. My head is not in the sand, people. I know, you know what I mean? Like we weren't given a choice, right? Whereas everyone else says, I'm leaving that bad situation to come to this country that's going to allow me those opportunities.
Yeah.
And we weren't given them, but we got to get past that. We've got to just, no one's going to help us with it. No one's going to hand it out to us. And following, you know, whoever your famous favorite rapper is, that's just not it. You know what I mean? Like, let's focus on other things first, and then figure out how to clean up the rest. That's about as clean as I can say it without.
He's about to be like, first of all, y'all.
Right.
No, I definitely appreciate it, man. I definitely appreciate just the time, the insight, communication. Like I said, I mean, we can talk forever about it. I still owe you a phone call separate of this anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, it'll be. I've had my father. We didn't really shoot a official episode, but we did a little kind of short, you know, talking about things. Only kind of halfway.
Okay.
Went into it. It's stuff that can definitely be addressed, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
But no, man, I appreciate just the, the openness, the vulnerability about a lot of the topics, even around stuff with like mental health is just interesting because there were questions that I was planning on, asking or just thinking about asking that I think even within, responses or just the openness that you have, you kind of handled it. So I really appreciate you, cuz. And you got any shameless plugs, any place you want? I mean, I don't know how many folks you can go get to be clients for you. I don't know what
so you know what? Actually, I want to plug. So I just here recently had an opportunity to start working with a mentor program here in Houston, Texas. It's called Musafa's Pride. They are doing an incredible job here in the community. They are working with young Black boys, school age young Black boys, and they're teaching them about manhood. And these brothers are doing a good job, very good examples. And they spend some time with them and really focus on, just as you asked me the question, what manhood really is, right? That making manhood matter is their slogan. I want to shamelessly plug them. I hope someone will hear it. I hope that they can continue to grow and with their outreach. And I'm certainly happy for that. So I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate it, John. Yeah. Listen, man, y'all take care. I need to get up out of Chicago and come down there because it is literally freezing up here all the time.
Well, come this weekend because it's gonna get back down into the 20s here. We don't. Yeah, it usually lasts for like a day and a half, and then it'll be back 60, 75.
Nah, 80. Dog. I didn't woken up and it's been about 2 degrees out here. And that's without exaggeration. Like, I woke up and cursed at Alexa. I asked Alexa, I was like, what's the weather today? She's like, it'll be 2 degrees. I'm like, shut up. But no, man. I just appreciate you taking the time. Please send, the family all my love, and just always appreciate rapping with you, man.
Thank you, cuz I appreciate you having me. Love what you're doing, man. You keep doing it, man. I see you on your, me, I'll tell you, I'm not a social media guy, but I see some things that you're doing as positive, and I certainly appreciate it, man.
Thank you, man, for sure. Thank you for taking the time. Peace out. And catch you later. Keep on being the great father to the kids. Tell the wife I say, hey, just send all the love, man.
Thank you, man. Will do.
All right, take care.
Peace.
Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love, now I'm